watching my videos for a while, you might remember at the beginning of this year when I was in Australia, I started this project and this was my sister's idea. She wanted to create this shell artwork inspired by this woman on Instagram called Lulu DK. I'll link to her below. She makes the most amazing shell artwork and it's so cool. So I really want to create my own. And the one that Liv and I started in Australia, we never really finished. And I just wanted to get it finished, you know, I wanted to make my own. So this is kind of like a second attempt at this. I already have learned a few things from when we first attempted it in Australia. So this is gonna go really well. I'm gonna share everything with you. So let's get into it.
So starting with the base, I just thought an oval would be an interesting shape to work with. I have a few ideas about things that I could do to make this really interesting. Turns out finding a piece of wood that is cut in the shape of an oval is actually quite hard. In the end, I found this that is actually meant to be the base of a shield. So I'll leave it linked below. Then onto the base color, I picked these samples as inspiration, but then I realized I could only get that paint in really big tubs and I need such a little amount for this. So instead I got the closest colors I could find in these little sample rollers, and one of these was plenty to cover the whole board in the color that I chose. Now, should I have covered this wood in some kind of primer first? Yeah, probably, but I didn't and it worked fine. I just did 2 coats of this. And it worked out really well because even for 2 coats, I only needed one of these little rollers to get the whole job done. So while I waited for the paint to dry, it was time to pull out all of my shells. Now this is a real random selection. A lot of these I bought with the intention of using for this project, but there were also ones from around the house, from various projects over the years. And I just thought, let's pull them all together and just look at what we've got. What sizes do we have? How many of each do we have? Like, what do we have in front of us? So pretty much as soon as I started trying to put the shells in place, I realized they need to be organized by size order so that you can see what you've got, like how many big and medium and small and extra small of any given shell, because you really do need to have that consistency. That's what this design is all about. You need really consistent and uniform sizes across any kind of shell type.
Get out. No.
As I played around with the design, I realized that really tight lines of really tiny shells created a lot more impact. And so I went around this starting point of this circle focal point and brought them in way closer together. And once I did that, it really started to look more like what I was going for. So now I just need to try and replicate that throughout the whole thing, I think.
Okay, so here's where I'm at so far. I actually haven't made that much progress. I'm nowhere near finalized like my design of what I want, because as soon as I started like fiddling around and playing around, I realized I need a lot more shells and I need small shells. So you do want to have some big shells for sure as like sort of statement pieces, but when you look at Lulu's artwork, it's actually quite a lot of very, very small shells sort of making these beautiful patterns. So it depends, I think, on like your base. What are you putting the shells on? Because this thing that I'm using actually isn't that big. And if I was doing this on a wall, like what Lulu does do a lot, and she does it on ceilings as well, which is so beautiful, it's a bigger space, so a bigger shell works. But what I've realized is ones that are about this size are just pushing the boundary a bit, because you can't really make it like a, you know, like a border or like a little bit of a curved thing, because like 4 of these takes up the whole thing kind of thing. And it kind of, kind of sucks the air out of the space, is what I would say. So I'm finding my favorite ones to use so far have been like this small. That's what I'm talking about, like really, really tiny. And even these little star ones also, I think are quite cute. I'll link below all the shells that I've used and I'll just name them how I would describe them. It's not going to be their technical name. But I have found that I've ended up with a lot of shells that are too big, which is fine because I can use them for another project. So these, for instance, are so beautiful, but they're just a bit too big. And while I thought I could use these around the edge or something to like add some width, and I might still, I haven't written that off. They feel so delicate, like these are really, really thin. I'm scared if I were to attach them that they could end up breaking and then you have like chipped shells around the edge. But I'm just gonna leave them and just, you know, not make any heavy decisions yet. We're just gonna play it out. So I've ordered a few more tiny shells. So some of these black ones and then these little white ones. And there's one more order of shells on its way. Even these, which are beautiful purple shells, these actually my dad sent me. They literally collected these at their beach house. These are really, really common in Australia. But they're just too big. These are a similar one, but they're much smaller and much more useful at this scale. So I'm gonna keep these. There'll be a use for these one day, for sure. But overall, what I've learned so far is you want to start off with a focal point. You want something in the center that you start to build out around. And a common thing that Lulu DK uses is this. It's a sand dollar. I've been to beaches where these are really common, and then in other places you never come across these. They're called sand dollars. So that's one side, and this is the side that I used. I think you can get bigger ones, but this is what I've got. Starting with that was a good point to just start with something. You know, this is another one that's too big to really make a repeating pattern out of, even though I have quite a few of them. This is about as big as you could have on this size board. So then it's about using these tiny ones to start to create sort of little swirls or whatever, and then just have moments of slightly bigger shells and then maybe some much bigger shells if it makes sense. But I just keep finding myself feeling like there's too many too big shells for this size. That's where I'm like stumped, you know? Another thing that Lulu DK does that I think is really important if you want to get that look is she uses these blue shells. These are called limpets. I don't know if that's how you say it, but I think that these must be quite common in the area where she is. She's in the Caribbean somewhere, I think, and she seems to use a lot of these blue ones. They're quite striking with a beautiful blue color. These were the most expensive shells for me to get, and the expense was in getting them shipped to the UK. The other thing is that with small shells, you need quite a lot of them to be able to make the whole shapes that you want. So for instance, the border of this, I actually don't have limitations on what size it could be, because, you know, I could use one this big, or I could use these ones. I could around the border, but I'm not sure. I might have enough of these, but like I don't have enough of these or these, which could look cool, very like, you know, coastal vibes. If I made a pattern of these, that could be cool, but I don't have enough of them. So this is what I keep coming up against, is sort of having to figure that out. But I've ordered some more shells and waiting for them to arrive. So I'm putting this on pause for now, because there's no point in thinking that I'm going to come up with something until I can really reassess what do I have. So I'm moving on to phase 2 of my shell project, which is in a very different direction. So this one is very coastal, very pretty, very decorative, very orderly, very, you know, kind of like shapes and very decorative and organized and like a recognizable pattern. The next one is going to look like, hopefully, it washed up out of the sea. Now, this is in a very different direction, but still very much in the shell family. This one is inspired by another person on Instagram, which is this florist guy. He makes the most like amazing floral arrangements and makes like videos on Instagram about them. His floral arrangements are no doubt beautiful, but every time I see them, it takes my breath away when I see this vessel that he uses. It's like this ceramic pot that's like, looks like it has oysters growing on it. And it's just so organic. And I don't know, there's something about it that just, I'm obsessed with. And I found out who the artist is who does it. And her stuff is just so beautiful. And I actually would really like to own one of her pieces one day. But for now, I thought, why don't I try and do like a version of this, a DIY version? Because it is quite expensive. Like the one that I saw, I think was around $1,500, which is a lot of money. And you know, I've got a toddler. Is that sensible? It's no, the answer is no, it's not sensible. So let's make a DIY one that won't be the end of the world if it has a little bit of a tumble, because with a toddler who loves to kick balls around, it's high risk. So here's my idea. I'm like pulling together all these different ideas of things that I've seen. So I'm starting off with like my base, which is this, which cost me £4. I don't know, I actually can't remember where I got this from, but I will link to a similar one below. The most important thing with this, and I spent a lot of time looking carefully for one that was the right shape, and I'm glad it turned out to be so cheap, is you want something a little bit like bulbous, but also because of the delicate nature of this, I wanted something that had a wide enough opening at the top that I can put another vessel in it. So I don't plan to fill this with water, just because I don't want to then get the rest of what I'm about to do to it wet. Like I don't know if it can handle it. It certainly is not going to go in the dishwasher. So it's better off just using something that I just put another thing inside of. I need to have a wide enough opening. Now, the other type of thing that I considered using for this, because glass isn't the best for this, is like a terracotta pot. So you could be able to go to the hardware store or the garden center, and you might actually be able to find something that has that kind of right shape, but is actually more of a ceramic thing. My only worry with that, because I really considered that, my only worry was that it might end up being too heavy. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So my idea is to take this stuff. This is wall tile adhesive and grout. So this is like, you know, like a porous, and it's anti-mold, which is good. It's got high grab and non-slip, and I have bought it in the color gray. I have seen people mix paint in with this kind of thing, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start with gray. Basically, I'm going to cover this whole thing in that grout, and I'll probably do a couple of layers, and I want to make it look like a rock, basically. Then the next thing I need to do is make it look like a rock with sea life living on it, you know? So in my shell hunt on eBay, I think I bought most of my shells on eBay, and I'll link all of them below, the exact ones that I got. I wanted to get some oyster shells. I came across these particularly ugly oyster shells that come from the Thames, the river in London that is, you know, not a nice river. I wouldn't want to eat oysters from the Thames. I wouldn't want to eat anything from the Thames. But they're very gnarly. And like, while it's totally not suitable for the Lulu DK aesthetic, it's perfect for this aesthetic. So let me just show you a few of these. So have a look at these. They are just like so gnarly and like random. They're all like inconsistent shapes, and they have like barnacles growing on them. Like they're just literally perfect for this look. Like look at all the barnacles on this one. I wish actually more of them had this much stuff growing on them. But it's sort of varying degrees, but I'm going to use them strategically. So my idea is I basically want to create this surface on the glass vessel, and then I want to add the oyster shells in it so they look like they're like growing on this thing. And I want to try and make sure I focus on getting the ones that particularly have a lot of barnacles and like stuff like that. I want to make sure I'm showing them so that you can really see that, because that's the kind of thing that's going to really make it look like it came out of the ocean. But not only that, I then want to take it just to the next level. So I can't exactly explain where this part of the idea comes from. This is my own kind of twist on this look. So the original does definitely look like it kind of fell out of the ocean in a really, I think, beautiful way. But I wanted to add like another kind of thing. Like I looked at buying barnacles to add to them, but something that I thought could be really special if I do it in the right way is to add a little bit of a sparkle, like a subtle sparkle. Now just like come with me on this journey. I really love abalone shells, also known as mother of pearl. See this like just subtle shimmer that they have? Like, look at this piece. They're all different. I just bought these like chips of them. You can buy whole shells and you can buy all sorts of things, but I thought actually, what if I were to add just a few bits like this? It's just like a bit of a wonky thing, but it just has a subtle shimmer on it. I think that could look cool, especially because there are bits that are like, that have this kind of blue color. It's a little bit hard to see, but they have this like blue shimmery color. I think that's gonna look quite cool. So, hopefully. And also, when I do it, I could always add a few of these other like shells that I have here, especially like barnacle-y looking ones, like these ones. You know, you could just like plant one or two, just a subtle little thing. Really the opposite approach though to this one, which is like not subtle. It is not, you know, random. It is everything goes in its order and line them up and everything. The opposite for this one is just like, maybe I'll just put one half broken shell of, you know, if there's a broken one of these little blue ones, just add that in there. Or, you know, maybe just one of these shoved under an oyster shell, just peeking out the bottom for a little bit of purple. Like, looking way more natural is the goal. After I put all the grout on and then I've like shoved all of the shells into it and it's dried, I'm going to reassess what's going on. I expect that this tile grout, which is just a plain grey colour, will be a bit flat looking and I'll want to add some dimension to it. So that's going to be the next phase of it, that I think that I will paint it just to add some like shadowing and stuff. And I'm really going to be thinking about all the things that I did when I made that fake limestone sink, that I really took like a plain flat coloured thing. And it really did look like it had washed up out of the ocean just with paint. And I didn't do that many different colours on it. So I could do a similar technique on this just to give it a bit of a dimension so that it looks real. But also, I've never used this tile grout stuff before, so I don't really know what this is going to be like. So this is going to require quite a lot of like trial and error. So we'll have to like, you know, play it by ear. So let's just start and see where it takes us. Okay, so here's where I'm at with this. So what I've realized is you can just slap it on, like, you know, the messier the better. Normally with this kind of thing, you want to make it smooth, but that's absolutely not what I want for this. If I had done this upside down and I covered this with this stuff, it might actually interfere with how flat this sits and its stability. So I just thought I'd rather get the top right with the coverage of this stuff and just let the bottom be what it's going to be. Now, the other thing that you really need to think about when you do this is I've left this little spot here, which is how I turn it, because you need that. Otherwise your hands will get dirty. So I recommend just picking one spot and going, I'm going to do that at the very, very end, because you do need somewhere to be able to pinch onto to, like, you know, be able to move it around. The other thing is I did actually leave the price tag on this, and you can see it. And the reason for that is I thought that's actually a good little marker of the back or the front. Maybe I make it the front so that when I'm using it in the future, that's like the label on it almost. And that can help me really easily just swivel it around to the right position so that it's showing the best bits, because I think it's going to be a lot like a Christmas tree. You know, I want it to look good from every side, but there is going to be a better side to look at, you know, there always is. So this will help me plan it in that way. So yeah, I think this is looking good. Just got to like finish up these bits. I'm definitely going to come through with another layer though, because I want to sort of, once it's dry, bulk it out even more to just make it really inconsistently shaped.
So when this was partially dry but not fully dry, I came back and got a little bit creative with these shells. My idea was, I really wanted barnacles, and I wanted to figure out if it was possible for me to create them within the texture of this, So I tested with a few little things, and I found that it totally worked when I imprinted one of the shells and then sort of flattened around the edge. So you can see here it starts off as like a little bit of a bump, and then poking a hole in the middle, like that looks like a barnacle. And you just keep doing that in little clusters. I could have done more, but I think this worked really well just to add a bit of that kind of, I don't know, authenticity maybe. It really does look kind of like some barnacles are growing there. Also at this point, I realized we'd had a little bit of slippage down this side, but I actually kind of love it, and it just looks even more like interesting. So I'm all up for including it and just embracing this in the design. So then I hot glued the oyster shells on here, and I wasn't sure about whether to do it fully covered or not. Obviously this isn't going to be exactly like the one that I'm copying because I'm doing it with different stuff, and like I could never create something as beautiful as that. But with this own version of it, should I cover the oysters all over it or leave some gaps? So I've decided to leave some gaps and just start to paint around the edges to get that coverage. And I probably should have painted the whole thing first before I put any oysters on, because it did make it difficult to paint. But my approach is going to be, here we are, we've got this many oyster shells on here. Let's paint it for now, get it to a point where the paint looks really good and realistic, and then reassess. That's my approach. Meanwhile, with this one, I had really kind of stopped making progress on it. I just found it difficult to like commit to any choices, and I found myself feeling really indecisive. And to be honest, this took me so long to do. It took me weeks to do it. If I hadn't done this before, I'd think, why would it take that long? It's so simple. It looks simple, but it's actually really kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, and you need to figure out the sizes and then how many you have, and then if you use your small little ones over here, you then won't have enough left over to use them over there, and you kind of have to problem solve a lot, which is enjoyable, but it just was really surprising how long it took. So it was at this point that I finally made the call to put these big pink ones around the edge. They really did make the whole thing seem a lot bigger and have a lot more impact. So I tested out a few different combinations and just kind of let it sit to decide which I liked better. And there also was the consideration of what was most practical, thinking about how am I going to be able to lift this and hang it on a wall, and all of these things that we're trying to weigh up as you do it. Like there's a surprising amount of decisions and things that you have to take into consideration as you make these choices. It sounds ridiculous, but it is a lot that you have to think about. I kind of felt like I needed to make the commitment of this border to then help me be more decisive with the things on the inside, because you could kind of see how it was all framed and how it was going to come together. Before that, I was so reluctant to stick anything down. So this kind of really helped me start to make a lot of progress quite quickly. For the outside shells, I used hot glue because I really wanted them to be at a specific angle so that it wouldn't cause problems when it's hanging on a wall. I wanted them to be lifted up a little bit. But for all of the rest of the shells, I used PVA glue, and I found that worked really well because it was a flat enough surface that they could sit in the right spot for long enough for it to dry, but also it dries so strong. So I'm really confident that they're not gonna fall off.
Appalachian sunrise meets my skin. Even with my eyes still closed, I can feel it coming in. Golden, golden, I'll follow only golden, golden. golden things. Mountain laurel high fives for miles in spring. Rainbow trout and a hummingbird wing. Golden, I'll follow only golden. Golden, golden things. Gold hair, gold rings, gold leaves, gold anything, golden. I'll follow only golden, golden, golden things.
So I hope you've enjoyed this little project. I'm so happy with how this turned out. I doubted myself throughout the entire process. Like, I really thought that my version of it just didn't look that good. But it really took making the commitment of putting down those big pieces around the edge and then just committing to each other decision that I made and just going with it. And if I changed my mind about something I'd already done, figuring out a way to make it work. Like, the certainty of each part actually made it easier than when everything was loose and I could change anything. How much do you change, you know? So I really, really enjoyed it. I think they could look really cool in a bedroom either side of a bed, or even like above if you had like a pair of beds above each bed. I also think that experimenting with like different shapes could be cool. Lulu seems to always do circles and rectangles, but I'm really happy with my little oval and my version of it. But my main tip is just get the small shells. You want really, really tiny shells to the point where it's actually probably easier to use tweezers to put them in place because they're that small. So I've got everything linked below of what I used so you can copy exactly mine or do it in your own way. And it's just a bit interesting, I think, instead of just having framed art on the wall, to have something that isn't really framed art. It's a different kind of art on the wall. So I'm absolutely obsessed with mine. I really, really love it. With regards to this one, the brown paint has definitely dried a lot darker than I was intending. And I do wish that I had just painted the whole thing first, because it's just a little bit fiddly to do it with the oyster shells on it. But I must say that the oyster shells do give me a bit of a reference point of the color that I'm trying to get to. Like, I could keep it this color, but I want it to sort of be similar, like sort of camouflage, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I have got a little abalone shell wedged in there. See how it's just kind of like a little bit subtle. You don't quite necessarily realize it. It's like in the sun, you can, but I like it. So I've got to continue tackling this one, I think, but I think it's going to take me some time. So I'm going to continue working on this. I have a plan for it. My plan is to get hydrangeas. So last year I got hydrangeas out of my garden and I just literally chucked them in a basket and they dried out. And they looked really good, but this year I want to try something different. I'm going to try a technique to preserve them better, because even though they looked okay, they were very, very brittle and very dry. So there are ways that you can preserve them that make them last longer and make them a little bit less delicate, hopefully. So I'm gonna be trying that out soon. And I think a huge bunch of hydrangeas in here could look really cool. So I think we might finish this when we tackle that project and it can all come together. So make sure you subscribe if you want to see how it turns out, and if you want to learn about hydrangea preserving with me. I don't know how it will go. It's all an experiment, but make sure you subscribe and make sure you follow me on Instagram, and I'll see you in the next video.
Golden, golden things. Golden, I'll follow only golden. Golden.